Senator Paul.
Our founders debated extensively over which branch of government should have the power to declare or initiate war. Virtually unanimously, they decided, and what was entered into the Constitution was that the declaration or initiation of war would be the power of Congress.
What you just heard from Senator Rand Paul wasn't a partisan rant. It was a warning. And whether you're on the left, the right, or somewhere in between, it should make you uneasy.
Now, we have many advocates, many of whom are here today, who have been advocates for an expansive notion of presidential power. They often argue that wars are not really wars, that they're kinetic actions or drug busts. I think, though, if you reverse the circumstances, it becomes very difficult for these arguments to hold up. So I would ask you, if a foreign country bombed our air defense missiles, captured and removed our president, and blockaded our country, would that be considered an act of war?
Well, I think your question is about and I will acknowledge you've been very consistent on all these points the entire career. So let me, no matter who's in charge. So I will point to two things. The first is it's hard for us to conceive that an operation that lasted about 4.5 hours and was a law enforcement operation to capture someone we don't recognize as a head of state, indicted in the United States, wanted with a $50 million bounty.
My question would be, if it only took 4 hours to take our president, it's very short, nobody dies on the other side, nobody dies on our side, it's perfect. Would it be an act of war?
We just don't believe that this operation comes anywhere close to the constitutional definition of war.
But would it be an act of war if someone did it to us? Nobody dies, few casualties, they're in and out. Boom, it's a perfect military operation. Would that be an act of war? Of course it would be an act of war. I'm probably the most anti-war person in the Senate, and I would vote to declare war if someone invaded our country and took our president. So I think we need to at least acknowledge this is a one-way argument. One-way arguments that don't rebound, that you can't apply to yourselves, that cannot be universally applicable are bad arguments. So my next question would be, let's say it's not a war. And we're just going to define it away and say it's not a war. That's one of the arguments. So it's a drug bust. What if a foreign country indicts our president for violating a foreign law? Should we extradite our president, or should we be okay if they come in and get him by force?
Look, I think ultimately we're always going to act in our national interest. And so if somebody comes after our national interest, like the case you've described, which obviously does not exist at this time, but the case you've described, the U.S. always has the right to act in its national interest and to protect itself. So really I don't know about this equivalency. Well, does this justify them doing it? We're always going to do what's best for the United States and America. We're always going to protect our system.
But the point isn't, and you're exactly right, we will act in our national interest and we should. So I'm not disagreeing with you at all. What I'm saying is, though, that our arguments are empty then. The drug bust isn't really an argument. It's a ruse. The war argument, not a war, is a ruse. It's not a real argument. And we do what we do because we have the force, we have the might, we do it because it's in our interest. So we wouldn't let anybody come in, bomb us, blockade us, and take our president. We've had arguments about legitimate, illegitimate presidents, bad elections, rigged elections. So there's all kinds of same arguments that we've had in our country that they've had in Venezuela. But we wouldn't argue for an indictment. And these things aren't idle speculation. I mean, Netanyahu's been indicted by the ICC. And one of the reasons I object to being part of the ICC, and I would say you and the administration probably agree, is we're not going to let any international council indict our president and arrest him somewhere on foreign soil. We're not going to do that. We actually, most of us probably object to indicting Netanyahu in that way as well. So I think the arguments are invalid. So we did get the legal opinion that Senator Kaine referred to, the OLC opinion, Office of Legal Counsel. And I think a lot of it's been released. Plus, they came to our caucus and talked most of the open about everything they had classified. So I will talk about at least one of the arguments. They say this war wasn't a constitutional war. Therefore, it doesn't rise to the constitutional notion of us declaring or having to initiate the war. It just doesn't rise. And one of their main arguments was not enough people died. And so there is some number that they aren't specific, but there is some number. I would assume, although I'm not positive, but the 50, 60,000 soldiers who died in Vietnam might be enough for them to call that a war. But here's the problem. It isn't the number, it's that it happens in retrospect. See, our founders gave us the power to initiate or declare war. They didn't give us other powers to execute the war. Those are left to the president. But if we have to wait to see how many people are killed, we have to wait, as they describe it, as the scope, nature, and extent. If we have to wait to see the scope, nature, and extent, the war has been going on for some time. It's hard to vote to initiate a war that's been going on. And we can say this war is over, but we're still blockading it, and we may go back in. But there are no clear answers. You know, we put 2,000, we leave 2,000 troops in. Are we going to call that war and initiate it? So the definition of war is very important. And I think we have to acknowledge the problems with our argument. Calling things kinetic action is a disservice to our soldiers. Oh, you weren't really wounded in war. You don't have a Medal of Honor for war. You have a Medal of Honor for a kinetic action. So I think let's call it what it is, and let's vote on these things. But I think we're in violation of both the spirit and the law of the Constitution by bombing a capital, blockading a country, and removing elected officials. And we certainly wouldn't tolerate it, nor would I if someone did it to us.
Well, we didn't remove an elected official. We removed someone who was not elected, and it was actually an indicted drug trafficker in the United States. And their system...
Our laws, indicted under our laws. Look, Bolsonaro says that Da Silva is not really the president of Brazil. Our president said Biden wasn't really the president. Hillary Clinton said in 2016 Trump wasn't the president. So you have these arguments, and I agree with you. It probably was, and most likely was, most assuredly was a bad election. He wasn't really elected. But at the same time, if that's our predicate, and you don't have to come to us because it's a drug bust, we're just removing somebody, you can see where it leads to, and it leads to chaos. And that's why we have rules like the Constitution, so we don't get so far out there that presidents can do whatever they want. It is this check and balance. And I would argue for 70 years we've been going the wrong way. It isn't just this president, but it's a debate that I think is worth having.
And this is the part of the conversation that doesn't get clipped, doesn't trend, and doesn't fit neatly into a headline. But it may be the most important part of all. Because once you strip away the personalities, the countries involved, and the legal jargon, what this debate really exposes is a deeper truth about how power works in modern America. We've quietly accepted a system where presidents act first, justify later, and almost never face a meaningful check from Congress. Not because the Constitution changed, but because our tolerance did. The founders didn't give Congress the power to declare war as a symbolic gesture. They didn't do it because they trusted Congress more than presidents as people. They did it because war is irreversible. Once bombs fall, once borders are crossed, once lives are lost, the debate is already over. Authorization after the fact isn't restraint, it's endorsement under pressure. And that's why this idea that something didn't rise to the level of war should make everyone uncomfortable. Because who gets to decide that? The very branch that benefits from acting unilaterally. If war only becomes war once enough people die, then we've inverted the entire constitutional design. We've turned prevention into hindsight. We've made Congress a coroner instead of a decision-maker, counting casualties instead of weighing consequences. What makes this moment especially troubling is how normalized all of this has become. We barely even notice the language anymore. Kinetic action, operation, law enforcement mission. These terms don't just soften reality, they distance the public from it. They allow us to engage emotionally without engaging democratically. And when you do that long enough, you create a public that feels permanently detached from the act of war, even while paying for it, fighting it, and living with its consequences. This isn't about whether the target was good or bad. It's not about whether the person removed was legitimate or corrupt. Those questions matter, but they come after the constitutional question, not before it. Because if legality and accountability depend on whether we like the outcome, then they aren't really principles at all. They're excuses. What Rand Paul is pointing to, maybe unintentionally, maybe deliberately, is that America has built a foreign policy where power has replaced process. We don't ask, are we allowed to do this? We ask, can we get away with it? And as long as the answer is yes, the debate ends. But that mindset has consequences. Once you justify actions purely on national interest and capability, you surrender any coherent argument against others doing the same. You can object, you can condemn, you can sanction, but you can't convincingly claim a rules-based order if you treat the rules as optional. And this isn't theoretical. We've already seen where this logic leads. Endless conflicts with no clear beginning and no clear end. Wars that aren't called wars, but somehow never stop. A Congress that debates everything except the one thing it was explicitly empowered to decide. What's perhaps most alarming is how bipartisan this erosion has been. Different rhetoric, same result. Different justifications, same expansion of executive authority. And each administration inherits not just power but precedent, the most dangerous kind of legitimacy. Because precedent doesn't ask permission, it just accumulates. So when people hear this exchange and think, well, this president won't abuse that power, they're missing the point. The Constitution wasn't written for good presidents. It was written for worst-case scenarios. It was designed to restrain ambition, not trust it. And when Congress fails to assert itself, it doesn't just weaken one branch. It weakens the public's role in deciding when and why force is used in their name. That's what makes this debate so unsettling. Not because there are easy answers, but because we've stopped insisting on having them at all. If war is too serious to debate, then democracy has already lost. And if Congress doesn't reclaim its authority, the question won't be whether future presidents overreach. It will be whether there's any meaningful mechanism left to stop them when they do. This wasn't just a constitutional argument. It was a warning. And whether anyone in power listens may determine how much the Constitution still matters when the next operation begins.